Hudson, and Cunningham, which is a quorum of our committee. We have a consent agenda that consists of a number of items, including items 7, which are the liquor license approvals, 8, which are the liquor license renewals, 9, the business license approvals, and 10, the business license renewals. 11 are the gambling license approvals, 12 are the gambling license renewals. Item 13 are business license operating conditions at 4200 Minnehaha Avenue. It's a taxi driver license. Item 14 are Uptown Lotus business license operating conditions. Item 15 is Genuine Spa business license operating conditions. There's a rental license reinstatement in item number 16, a low bid for removal of branches and weeds in item 17. Item 18 is the I'll just wait till you're done talking. You done? Yep, okay, thanks. Item 18 is the Pathways to Prosperity Grant for the Public Safety Career Pathways Strategies. Item 19 is the Pathway to Prosperity Healthcare Career Pathway Employment Training and Services. And item 20 for the August round for DEED and the Redevelopment Grant Program. Are there any questions or comments on items 7 through 20, which make up the consent agenda? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Goodman. Just wanted to briefly comment on item 20 on the items we're moving forward for the deed redevelopment grants. I know we're going to have a conversation about the brownfield grants and the criteria for that, and just wanted to note that we also have not applied affordability to this as a lens. And I think that as we get into what are we moving forward as a city and how are we thinking about what gets public funds, there's an ongoing conversation that I just want to signal I'm interested in continuing to move forward.
Further comments on items 7 through 20? Seeing none, I'll move approval of the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those items are approved. We'll move on to item number 1, which is a public hearing.
Thank you, Madam
Ms.
Chair.
Roberts.
Yes, the number 1 is a public hearing for My Burger Operations LLC, doing business as My Burger. It's located at 213 Oak Street Southeast, Minneapolis, and it currently has an on-sale wine license, Class E entertainment. The purpose of the public hearing is the business wishes to permanently expand its business to allow for a sidewalk cafe on the public right-of-way for 4 tables and 16 seats. The hours of operation for this business, the sidewalk cafe will close every day at 10 o'clock. There's a public hearing that's required, and notices were sent to residents and property owners within 300 feet of this business. And we received 1 response that had a concern about alcohol in the area and it being near campus. License Inspector Dan Jacobs and Public Works reviewed the applications for meeting minimum standards, and we're making a recommendation to approve at this time.
Are there any questions for Ms. Roberts on item number 1? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing on item number 1, which is a permanent expansion of premise at 213 Oak Street Southeast. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Paul Abdo. I'm one of the owners of My Burger, and I appreciate the council for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. And we definitely appreciate the support. There's been a lot of requests from the campus community, families, and students to be able to sit out on the sidewalk. So I know that they'll be definitely grateful of the granting of the license to expand the business.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Fletcher.
I'm happy to move approval of this item.
Approval of item number 1 has been moved. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. On to item number 2, Ms. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item number 2 is from the applicant Majesty for Restaurants and Coffee Shop LLC, doing business as the original Uptown Pizza. It's located at 323 West Lake Street in Minneapolis, and the requested license is for an extended hours license so that it can operate until 2:30 a.m. daily. The license that it currently holds is for a food manufacturing license. A public hearing is required for such application. Notices were sent to within 300 feet to residents and property owners. We've received 0 responses, and License Inspector Amanda Chavez is making recommendation to approve this license at this time.
Are there any questions for Ms. Roberts on item number 2? Seeing none, this is a public hearing on item number 2, which is an extended hours of operation license for the original Uptown Pizza. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Ellison.
Madam Chair, I will move approval.
Approval has been moved of item number 2. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. On to item number 3, Ms. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The applicant is Wesley Andrews Conversation Compliments LLC, and the doing business as is Wesley Andrews. It's located at 111 East 26th Street, and this current restaurant is requesting a sidewalk cafe license. That does require a public hearing, and so public hearing notices have been sent to residents and property owners within 300 feet of the premises. We've received 2 responses in support for the sidewalk cafe that I should mention is going to be located on the 26th Street side of the property, right in front, and it will have 3 tables with 6 chairs. License Inspector Amanda Chavez and Public Works reviewed this application for minimum standards and are making a recommendation to approve at this time.
Are there any questions for Ms. Roberts on item number 3? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing on item number 3, which is a sidewalk cafe license for Wesley Andrews. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Fletcher.
Chair Goodman, I'll move approval of this item.
Approval of item number 3 has been moved. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll move on to item number 4. I'm looking to see is Mr. Ruff. Who is doing the presentation on item number 4? Mr. Ruff, welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Mark Ruff. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Minneapolis. Before you today is an annual event, a public hearing on license fees within the city. These fees are set annually upon recommendation of this body to the council. It is found in Appendix J of the Municipal Code. There are over 600 different line items of fees, so it's a daunting task to take on this process. Ordinance does require that we have this public hearing before September 1st of each year for implementation of the fee in the following year. We have other fees in the city other than these particular fees, vacant and boarded buildings. We have building permit fees, which were increased by inflation. We have franchise fees, which are applied against taxes or sales on electricity and gas usage of commercial and residential buildings. Those are separate processes. These are fees that apply against businesses, against rental housing primarily, and in particular have not been increased for a number of years by the city. And so this year we took on a more comprehensive view of these particular fees, and especially with the lens that fees are supposed to only cover the costs of what the enforcement of that particular fee is addressing. In reality, for the city of Minneapolis, we have been undercharging when we compare all of the costs associated with particular fee. That is assuming that the level of service that is provided is the proper level of service, and we can certainly have policy discussions as to whether we should be reducing the amount of service that we provide or increasing the amount of service. And I'm sure that you as a body will be hearing during the public hearing from people who have both sides of the view. As a part of this process, we are recommending in the calendar year 2019 of looking at certain fees and evaluating on a nationally best practices review, as well as looking at other cities in the state of Minnesota as to what is the proper level of inspections that should be associated with certain fees. We're not going to do every one of those 600 fees, but certainly would look for feedback from elected officials and the public on which of those fees are most important to them. These dollars are all recorded in the general fund for the people who don't deal with accounting on a regular basis. That's our regular, essentially, checking account for the city. It's what we pay most of our employees for. It's what we pay for police, fire, and regulatory services out of primarily. We have other types of funds which are associated with things like the convention center or target center, which are not addressed in the general fund. So the general fund is the basic checking account. So it means that all the money comes in and we pay it out out of this particular main fund. In terms of just demonstrating by different groups of these different types of license fees, we've put them into 5 different groups: pollution control, animal control, rental housing, health inspections, and business licensing. The recovery rate, meaning that the orange bars are the amount that we spend annually for either review or inspections or enforcement of each of the regulations that the city has set up over the years for these different types of entities, whether they be businesses or residential operations. In general, on average, we recover only 46% of these expenses. And so what we're doing with the change in the fees is trying to increase that percentage up to 56% on average. Some of them are not going up by much. As you can see, animal control, I think the main way that we would increase fees for animal control is actually, for example, increasing adoption fees. But I think most elected officials have chosen to say that we need to encourage adoptions as much as possible, and so cost recovery in that particular case is not as important as other policy goals that we have as a public body. In particular, you can see, and I'm sure why a number of people are here today, is that rental housing in the middle, in terms of our rental housing license inspections, we only recovering 30% of those costs, and so this particular change in the fee schedule, and for anybody who has not seen online, and I know for many of you it's probably your first time visiting the city council chambers, there is over on the left-hand side next to the clerk a copy of this presentation and then a copy of the actual fee schedules. But rental housing, we are not just baseline increasing the fees, but we're proposing to change how the structure of those rental housing fees actually work. And Mr. Intermal, our budget director, will review that with this body here as soon as I am completed. Health inspections have not changed much from one year to another on this particular area, but that is one that we would like to study more in terms of level of service that's being provided versus the costs. I would say this is, because it's the first time in 5 years that the city has increased fees, I would just consider this to be a first step. And what I mean by first step doesn't mean that we're going to be increasing dramatically fees every year. It means that we're going to take a closer look than we have over the last 3 to 4 years in terms of what our costs are, whether those appropriate level of costs, and then what the fees are. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Inimal, who's going to talk about just some recommendations and changes to some of the proposed fees, and then talk a little bit more in detail about the rental housing license, unless there's any questions for me at this moment.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ruff on his portion of the report? Seeing none, we'll have Micah come up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Micah Intermel, the city's budget director. So on July 10th, we published a recommendation through the Community Planning and Economic Development website. We are proposing a revision to that recommendation based on some feedback we received from during the public comment period from individuals and organizations. The first change is on page 2 of the revised schedule. Amusement devices. This was simply an error. We missed that there is a state statute capping those at $15 per device, so we had proposed a $5 increase. We're revising our recommendation to eliminate that increase, keeping them steady at 15. On rental licensure, so page 8 of the schedule has the rental licensure information. The big change here, based on feedback, was we were initially looking at rental licensure as one activity, where in reality it's 2. So there are the smaller 1 to 3 unit buildings and the larger 4+ unit buildings. So when we went back and looked at it, we were able to bring down the costs not only for the large buildings, but also for the tier 1 to 3 unit buildings as well. And so we just think that this is a better mix for the committee.
Are there any questions for Micah on this revised recommendation? Okay. Seeing none, thank you for your report. I have a sign-up sheet that has only 6 people on it, but it looks to me as though there's more than 6 people here to speak. So if you haven't signed up, I would encourage you to do so with the clerk. I'll note that I don't have a timer here today. I don't know why that is, so I will try. Do we have a timer? Mr. Sadler will use? Okay, and while we're working to set the timer up, I'll call on Councilmember Cunningham for a question of Micah.
Is
Or-
Mr. Ruff still here by chance? Well, I can ask you then instead. Well, I just wanted to get some clarification. On a previous slide, it showed that yes, there. So for the pollution control, is there a plan to eventually have that be 100% recovered?
Councilmember, that's a good question. I think we would defer to the committee. I think the question of whether a particular activity should be 100% fee supported or not is it's a great policy question for you all to drive on. But we would be happy to continue that conversation, as Mr. Ruff alluded to.
Great, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I have the first 6 people. I'll tell you, I'll try to attempt to tell you who has signed up, and I would invite you up to speak. This is a public hearing on item number 4, which is the 2019 license fee schedule with increases to the 2018 license fee schedule. I have Mr. Singleton, followed by Ms. Dixon, followed by, it's very hard, I'm sorry, Robert Malechik? Okay, sorry about that. Followed by, try it again. Mr. Chinoza, Mr. Layton, and Mr. Bridgner. I'll try that group. Any of those folks who I've called on, if you would step up to the microphone and line up, and we'll have you make your public comment. If you could say your name and address for the record, I can cross you off the list.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth Singleton. I live at 3955 Lindale Avenue South. I have 1 rental license. I think the increase this year is reasonable to me, but I do have the question that was just asked about regulatory programs. If we have a longer-term objective to try to recover more of the expenses. So did I understand that topic's going to be taken up later on?
So my understanding is we'll have a broader discussion about what percentage of cost recovery should be in each category going forward. But for right now, this is what the recommendation is. I would guess that we would steer more towards cost recovery rather than using property taxes to support cost recovery. Seems to be the direction the finance department is moving in.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are any of the other people who I called on in the room? Kay Dixon, Robert? Oh, great. Thanks.
Hi, Kay Dixon. This schedule I had not seen at the point that I signed up.
Okay.
I think if I am interpreting it correctly, it says that condo units, same building, same owner, will not pay a fee in 2019. Is that correct?
I don't believe it is correct to suggest that one license in one building would not pay any rental license fee. It would be for a single unit, I don't have it in front of me, the $80 plus 30 per unit. Kim, could you protect, I mean, others might have that question as well, so perhaps you could answer for Ms. Dixon.
Hi, Kim Keller, Regulatory Services. We are looking at having a fee for condo units and handling it a little bit differently than we have in the past. So looking at the number of condo units that an individual owns within a single building. So if an owner owns 1 to 3 units in that building, then fall underneath the 1 to 3 unit line within the appropriate tier. If the owner owns 4+ units within the same building, within the 4+ unit line, within the appropriate tier.
So treating condominiums like single family homes.
I would say treating condominiums as individual units within the same structure is what it says.
Okay, Ms. Dixon, did that answer your question?
It did, and then I would like to.
You could step forward.
Make my comment.
Please do.
Because My comment is, when you live in a larger condo building, I live in one that has 305 units. Our association oversees what can be done in terms of the rentals. So frankly, I don't understand why I need a rental license at all. I can understand if you're maybe in a duplex or a single family or smaller units, but in a large condo building, a condo association board is very concerned about what goes on in the building. And therefore, I see it as a revenue generator for you guys and an expense that I shouldn't have to have.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Did you have a question you wanted? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do understand why there was confusion. Looking at page 8 of this schedule, it looks like it is listed as 0 in a way that everything else is listed by the amount of fee. Is that 0 intended to indicate a 0 change from the previous year, or can you explain why it's printed the way it is on page 8 of the document we were all handed?
Councilmember Fletcher, apologies for the confusion. I think the intent is to suggest that there's no longer a specific condo category, but to Ms. Keller's point, the condos will be treated as based on the number of units owned, condos owned within a building and licensed accordingly.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. Are you Robert?
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me here. My name is Robert Malenik. It's a good Jewish name.
I should have had that.
Yeah, it's weird. I know. It's only Rob Malenik in the whole world. So actually, I got the privilege of being an accountant. So looking at the devil and the details associated with the rental rates, something doesn't make sense to me in correlation to the slides that your CFO showed us. So the prior slides that he showed us associated with the expense of the rental license shows that the rental licenses have been actually, twice as expensive to be able to maintain it from a licensing perspective. I understand the value of the licensing program. I understand that you guys need to be able to effectively review the properties. But I would argue that majority of the cost probably comes from properties that are of deficiency, per se. I would use a better term, but not sure. And so if you actually look at the cost of the deficiency in the old model was $700 associated, or sorry, this is kind of confusing. So tier 1, let's just use the 1 to 3 units, is $373. You go to the same number up above, so tier 1 to 3 units, it's only $300. So you're actually reducing the rates for the people that are paying or that are more deficient. And then if you go to the people that are tier 1, like myself, for my 2 duplexes, I pay currently $70 a unit. I'm actually going to go up to $150. So I would challenge that the methodology used associated with the increases be reviewed, because it seems like this is weighted more towards helping the larger units and for some reason reducing the fees for the deficient units versus people like myself that try to stay in the tier 1 category. I don't think that the rates should reflect a lower ratio for them, at least from what I can read here, because this wasn't provided until today. I don't understand why it would go down for them, but up for everybody that's in tier 1.
So I'll have our staff respond at the end. It didn't go down. It went down from the original proposal. So isn't that correct, Micah?
Well, the numbers say what the numbers are. So $70 right here, and then tier 1 up above is $80 plus 30. For each unit, I have to pay twice, so it's $140 total. If I was a tier 3, I'd pay $373 in the old model. The same model in tier 3, I'd pay $100 for my building plus $200 for each unit. So I'd pay less than if I had been before. So logically, it doesn't make sense to me, because I would argue that the fee structure should be correlated to the cost structure associated with the deficient properties. So the structure of this proposed model, you're not increasing it by 50% for the people that are more deficient. And why are you increasing it for people that are less deficient? And honestly, probably just meeting the expectations of this board and for the city. So this is why I'm really frustrated that this wasn't provided in advance and reviewed properly by an accountant like myself, maybe externally. It is. Everything is on here, sir.
We're
can
not
walk
sure
you
what,
through
yeah,
it,
we're not
but-
sure, we're not sure what you're looking at. That's
That's
the,
okay.
and nor could we probably explain what you're looking at. That's why staff are here, and if they're not capable of
Yeah,
explaining
I'm the
it, then
CFO
we'll
of a
postpone
company
the public
downtown
hearing.
here, so I'm pretty sure my math is right.
Right,
I
so Micah, either you can explain this to this gentleman, or we're not going to have a public hearing today, and we're going to postpone it until we can explain it. I'm not just going to have staff sit in the audience looking bewildered. That doesn't make any sense. Are any of the other people on this sheet who signed up, Jonah Bridger, Rob Layton, or Maeve Chino here? Please step forward.
So, Madam Chair, I think what may have been happening is we may have been missing the supplemental tier charge. So for, I'm not sure how many unit building the individual owns, but if it's a 1-unit building in tier 3, it would be charged $100 for the building, plus $155 for the unit, plus $200 on top of that. So it would be a total charge of $455 as compared to $373, which would have been the prior fee.
Okay, so perhaps you could talk to this gentleman and see if you can answer his question, and if you can't, we'll ask him to come back up and explain his concern again. Hello.
Madam Chair, Rob Layton with the law firm of Nolan Thompson Layton. I'm just here to thank the staff because they actually made the requested revision regarding amusement machines on behalf of the Minnesota Operators of Music and Music, and we appreciate the work of the staff in doing that.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Layton. Haven't seen you in a
Thank
long
you. Good
time.
seeing you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Jonah Bridger. I reside at 2510 North 4th Street. Have to pardon me, I'm a little bit intimidated. I can count on one time the number of times I've been before this board
Well, welcome.
since I moved here. But when I got the notice, it added to already kind of a little bit of angst watching all. I've got 3 properties in Minneapolis, 2 of them in the north, and one is my childhood home that went through 2 months of water damage before I even moved up here. I'm still working on trying to fix that one up, but I watched how all the property values went up anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 with a broad brush stroke, and I hadn't even added a toilet to any of them. So when I saw this and realized, I get a rental license. I have a triplex and then 11 unit. And 11 units in a really rough neighborhood. I live there to try to help maintain the crime and keep a hand on everything, and it's slowly picked up. Primarily, I've added surveillance cameras, and I'm pretty diligent. I'm tier 1 on both my properties. I guess when I saw the licensing going up, I don't honestly know what the licensing bureau does for me. They come out, they say, "Great, Domino Nabisco, you meet our standards and then some." And now I'm watching my license fees, well, darn near double. When I read the letter and said that you guys are only collecting like 2.5 million and the expenses are 9 million, but you annually review these, I'm like, if that was my business, somebody's heads would roll. Nobody gets a deficit to that extent. And I'm like, for the past several years, nobody picked this up. To me, that's kind of ridiculous. The department, I'm like, how do you get a 300% deficit? And now what I see in the past 6 months or whatever is that my property values are going up, and thus taxes, and now my license fees are going up. I don't make a lot off those rentals, because I try to keep them up to par. Stuff I'm recording property values kind of going down just because of the age of the buildings, but I'm watching my fees associated with that go up.
So your time is up, but I can quickly answer your questions. There have been no fee increases for 5 years. So we've tried to not have the burden go on to license holders by not increasing fees, even with the cost of living for a 5-year period. And it isn't a deficit. All of the property taxpayers, yourself included, are paying the difference. So we're collecting property taxes from everybody. And instead of using it for other services, we're subsidizing the rental licensing program with those property taxes, and we're trying to correct that.
I guess that's my question, though. If it's 9 million, I don't get 9 million, or I don't even get close to that
That's
in
the
services.
cost of managing all of the rental licensing in the whole city, which is in excess of 20,000 units, 25,000 units licenses. Yeah, so I'm not going to debate you back and forth. I'm just letting you know we haven't raised any fees in 5 years. So that's partially why you're seeing a large adjustment today.
So every 5 years we'll double it.
No, probably from here on out, it'll raise with the cost of living each year instead of having a major adjustment. No good deed goes unpunished. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on to the next list. If you signed up on page 2 and you won't know for sure, we have Mr. Gravsey, Mr. Smith, Mr. Forsline, Mr. Peel, Mr. Meyer, Ms. Wallner, and Mr. D'Souza. If I've called your name, you're in this next list. You are welcome to come up and get in line to speak.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Asher Gavzi. I work for Property Solutions and Services. We are a for-profit company that fee manages for mostly nonprofits throughout the Twin Cities. And I'm here today to, certainly there is a big deficit and there is a number that needs to be reached. I looked at 3 of the 5 websites of the elected officials, and affordable housing was a major platform on 3 of the 5. Easily right first page could see it. And so with the proposal that I would like for you to think about is 4D tax reductions, or properties that receive 4D tax reductions that have government subsidized money involved, currently have a regulatory process that receives major inspections by maybe MHFA every 3 to 5 years, by HUD every 1 to 3 years, and those inspections are much more vast and greater than the city licensing. And a way to reduce money on the city's point is they should be able to use MHFA or HUD's inspection to approve these, the rental licenses. They're all going off of a HUD REACT standard, which is, certainly much more comprehensive. And I think there's a way to try to find and fill the gap. And currently MHFA is doing that, where MHFA is accepting other agencies for like AHC, for instance, they will accept a inspection from AHC. And then my final point is certainly MPHA is a big priority, I think, and given the current change of environments, I think an opportunity that could be held is that, let's say 20% of your units are MPHA units. Those units get inspected annually. If they pass annually, they get inspected every 2 years. And you could use those inspections in lieu of the rental license. So that's what I have to say.
Great, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Smith, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Goodman and members of the committee. My name is Cecil Smith and I reside at 1331 Washington Street, Northeast. I am a city resident and rental property owner. I am here to speak in opposition to any fee increase on rental property, since this has a direct impact on housing affordability. This is a topic I've heard almost all of you address, but we're here today to raise $2 million on the renters of the city, even as the apartments they live in many times have experienced double-digit property tax increases. This is a confusing message. In principle, the city leadership desires affordability, but in practice, you increase costs. So I'm left with questions. Why? Why so much? Where is the comprehensive fee study listed in the RCA that justifies this increase? I've asked for it. It's mentioned in the RCA, but it's not here. Why isn't the cost and efficiency study of regulation being done first, which Mr. Ruff mentioned? That should be a priority. I have a national study here that says that regulation is 30% of the cost of multifamily development. What is the cost on the operations? And where are the efficiencies? I'm sure you've asked some of these questions, but this proposal has rolled out with last-minute consultation, defective assumptions, and minimal consideration of the consequences. For instance, your RCA document states that, quote, staff recommends restructuring the rental housing tier system in order to more appropriately shift the revenue burden towards larger buildings, as these properties require more time and effort from city inspectors. That's inaccurate. Staff's own analysis shows that the fire inspection service, which inspects large rental buildings, is a more efficient operation, spending 1.8 million of the 9 million expense, 20%. But they inspect 70% of the units in the city. I'm not sure what went wrong in the fee proposal development, but there's too many questions and not enough answers. I urge reconsideration so that we get this right and not put additional pressure on a strained rental market.
Thank you for your testimony. Please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm a good 30-year customer of the city's.
What's your name?
Patrick Fosleen.
Thank
Live
you,
over
sir.
16th and Tyler Northeast. Recently had to call the inspectors for 2 commercial properties in our neighborhood. The inspector told me there were 3 inspectors for the entire city. And that's probably why nothing ever gets done, at least in the commercial. I'm wondering how many employees take care of this rental housing? I mean, what's the biggest expense? Is it the inspectors? Can somebody answer that?
You're here to provide testimony and we're here to listen to you.
Okay. I'm really curious on what am I getting for the money I pay every year and the increases in taxes along with it. And I just would like to find out where most of this, was it $9 million budget? Where's that going to? I don't know what I'm paying for. What am I getting in return for my money? So I'm not happy with the increase, never am, and I don't like taxes going up. And I did have a bad tenant one time, and bad tenants, usually one of the first things they do is they call inspections and try and get my building condemned or something. And usually the inspectors say, man, this is the nicest place I've seen in Northeast. So I keep my house up to date and current and all that. And I just, I did have somebody come and rate me in this tier category, which I found that interesting. And I don't quite understand. It seems a little bit discriminatory that I'm a number 1 and somebody else is a number 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Meyer. I'm in Mr. Fletcher's district in Northeast Minneapolis. I'm also a property owner, 3 rental properties that are all tier 1 properties. And we've been in the rental business for about 5 years here in Minneapolis. I'm just speaking against any increase. Having observed the process for inspections of our properties, the paperwork, the amount of time and effort it takes to meet the inspectors, to go through the properties, to re-inspect, to make the changes, it's an additional cost. We're facing 13 to 15% property tax increase in our rental properties each in the last 2 years. So you take that and you add an additional rental fee increase, and it's almost absurd as far as the amount of money that we pay for a bureaucratic, process that I would hope that we could manage ourselves. We take great pride in our properties, we invest in our properties, and we take good care of our tenants. And for us to continue to invest in spending money doing this is a little beyond. I also met with Jacob Fry about 1.5 years ago with the tier process and just explained, and I documented all the inspections in our properties. And we were over there 5-6 times for each property in order for them to tier us. And we had inspectors who didn't show, who were not prepared, and I just observed the inefficiency of how we do it within the city of Minneapolis. So I would say instead of increasing the fee for those of us that are working hard to make good living for renters in the city, that we take those dollars out of the driving the efficiencies of managing the program and be more effective at doing that. Also, the other thing is we talk about affordable housing. When you have 13-15% increase year over year, the only thing you can do is increase your rents. So it kind of defeats the purpose of what we're talking about as far as rental increases for the city of Minneapolis. So
Thank you.
that's my vote, and I hope you would listen to a number of the property owners that would be against any increase. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
Hello, I'm Anthony Peel. I live on Quincy Street in Northeast Minneapolis. I've had my rental property for a number of years. It just became a rental. It's a duplex a few years ago. And at the time, I had to pay the $500 inspection fee for someone to walk through, tell me everything was good. I had to do one little thing, I forget what it was, but then they had to re-inspect, so I had to take time off work to do that. My questions mostly are around the $6.5 million deficit, why that wasn't dealt with earlier, and again, what is the cause of the deficit? Where's all that money being spent? Is it on staffing? Is it what's going on with that money? That seems to be a very large deficit even over a 5-year period. The other question is around inspections. I'm wondering if some of this budget is due to new construction. What are the new construction paying for the licensing of the new properties? Are they having to pay an inspection fee per unit?
Yep.
Et cetera. So those are things that I think would be nice to have in the public record.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
On this sheet, we still have left Kristen Wallner and Situ D'Souza. Are either of these folks here? Thank you. Yep, that's good. Just if you could just come to the mic.
Yep. Okay, I own a property over in Powderhorn, and I'm just wanted to say that I got the information about the hearing just within this last weekend and had to scramble to get down here, came late. There was no paperwork for me to look at, so I have no idea what's going on in terms of the paperwork, but I'm opposing the property tax increase, or excuse me, there is that, but the rental licensing increase, just because of affordability. I live in the duplex with my tenant, and I am looking for more efficiency with the city. Particularly, I pay the water bill, for example, and I pay for 2 units of garbage, and I have 1. We don't produce that waste,
Yeah.
and yet I'm paying about $250 a year for nothing. And it's frustrating because I call to get a smaller container, and I know this is a tangential moment, but it's the inefficiency, and then to tack on more fees is very, very frustrating. I pay for the garbage container that's not there, and to get a smaller one, I pay more. So I'm reducing waste, doing my good deed for the world, and still paying for it. So it's very, very frustrating. And so I oppose this this whole process.
Thank you for being here today. We'll move on to sheet number 3. Nick Puzak, Tom Borger, Gobin Persad, Wayne Carlson, Ryan Beaver, Zachary Ross, Rob Manich. If any of you are here, feel free to come forward. None of you have put your address on this, so we'll ask you to all state your name and address for the record. Mr. Puzak,
Hello, I'm Nick. I live in East Harriet. I was born and raised southeast.
can you give the clerk your address for the record, please? It's a public hearing.
4235 Lake Harriet Parkway. I've managed rental property for 35 years in Minneapolis. I've really never done anything else. A couple of points, please. A couple of gentlemen have made the point about the expense side of the equation versus the revenue side, and I think an examination of management metrics is appropriate instead of just looking at the expense side. The young lady talked about the notice. My letter dated July 13th. My postmark, July is the 18th for the notice on this meeting. There's a 5-day discrepancy there. Is that really fair to people?
No.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps an idea for solutions. I really don't know what's happening to all the property taxes that the city's component is of all this new construction in the city of Minneapolis. The rents per square foot that they're charging is unbelievable. And you're rubber stamping each and every literally pages of variances for developers with zero discussion. Sir, Mr. Fletcher, pleasure to make your acquaintance. There has been historically zero discussion, despite an ongoing and statewide debate about tuition, affordability at something called the University of Minnesota, a massive economic engine in our town. Zero discussion in your ward about affordability, none historically. And I look at you as for leadership on this issue.
Mr.
There has
Buzak,
been-
you could direct it towards me instead of anyone individually, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The fee per unit by tier type might be an idea, charging those who are causing the problems more. Another solution for this fee problem could be perhaps looking at your property tax rate given the age of the buildings. I'm going to look at just double, by federal tax law, double the useful life would be about something older than 50 or 55 years, taxed at a different rate than new construction. And the rents per square foot that are charged by new construction warrant this discussion in terms of affordability.
Mr. Buzak, your time is up, and you also know we don't have the ability to charge a different property tax rate under state law for buildings
Then
of
change
different
the
ages.
state law to make housing affordable in the city of Minneapolis. There's a tremendous amount of housing that has been built prior to 1970 that should be taxed at a lower rate. And if you really want to generate revenue, find some way to get the bicycle community with some skin in the game.
Good afternoon.
Good morning. I'm Mr. Tom Bogan. I've been landlording 25 years in the South Minneapolis area.
What is your address, sir?
At my personal address?
Yep.
17557 Kodiak Court, Lakeville. I currently own 5 duplexes in the Lake Nokomis area, Diamond Lake area, in addition to Bloomington and St. Paul, which is another issue. But I'm really frustrated, I guess, with the inspections process in general. I don't feel like what I pay for is what I'm getting. I like inspectors to come out to my place. I think it's a good idea. We need inspectors to keep people safe. Okay, let's just make that clear. My buildings are all tier 1. I average 1 visit from an inspector per year for 14 different units. That's less than a 10% visitation ratio. So if you, let's say it's even if I used 10 as a factor, if I multiplied this fee of $140 times 10, that's $1,400 I'm paying per visit is all I'm getting for a 20-minute visit to check the light bulbs. I mean, and you guys are talking about how big of an organization and what responsibilities you have, and I understand that and I respect that, but shouldn't your side of the operation be getting more efficient? I mean, how many what am I paying for? Printer paper or printers, or what's the $1,400 going for per visit? I don't understand it. I would suggest, with my limited time left, that for tier 1, you just charge by the visit, because you're not sending inspectors out to those buildings anyway. You know, quit charging me every year for something I'm not receiving. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Wayne Carlson. I live at 523 Coventry Lane in Edina. I have rental housing in the city of South St. Paul, Minneapolis. I've owned them for over 30 years. I've never had an inspector come out and have to come for a second choice. So in Minneapolis, I mail in my money, and that's what happens. I guess there's a couple things. In my St. Paul buildings, when I have a tier 1, I only get inspected every 4 years. In Minneapolis, I get inspected. The fire department comes out there. They sit there with the big vehicle, the emergency vehicle. 4 people stand in the street, and 2 people come in my building for nothing. I called down there. I got this this notice, and they said they'd sent out a notice to my address. So I asked them what address that was, and they said it was an address that I hadn't had for 15 years. Last time I had a notice, I called them and gave them my correct address. You know, so maybe there's some efficiencies. You know, when I have to call twice and 3 times to get a simple address change, maybe there's something wrong with the administration, and maybe there's something wrong when you have to have 6 people come out, stand in the street, and 2 of them go through my building. I mail in my money every year. I get the paper coming out, and I don't think it's worth the money I'm putting in. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
My name is Prasad, P-E-R-S-U-D Prasad. I am in Eatington Park, Park Avenue. I had 4 buildings in Park, and from tier 1 to tier 3, you had me over 15 years for tier 1. How come you got me tier 3 now without any instruction or any publication of anything in that thing? Why did somebody tell me, well, from tier 1 to tier 3? Why didn't someone tell me?
We're not going to be answering questions. This is your chance to speak.
Well, I want to know why somebody tell me from tier 1 to tier 3? Who will tell me that?
The staff will respond at the end to the questions.
Who is that? The staff?
Our city staff will respond at the end of the public hearing. And perhaps you could leave your address with the clerk for the record.
Okay.
Thank you. Don't be shy.
Hi, Zachary Ross, 511 West Franklin Avenue, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm just concerned about rental properties that are unlicensed, and if we're trying to capture more revenue, I would appreciate a more robust system for capturing those unlicensed properties. Thank you.
Do you have are you aware there's a problem with lots of unlicensed rental properties?
My wife and I have bought 3 different duplexes, and I've helped with purchasing the other ones. And just talking to the neighbors, I know a number of different illegally rented properties. Just through the process of buying a house, you know, you have different liens or whatever, or you just talk to the neighbors for various reasons. Anyways.
I could just picture our inspectors going out and saying, is there an illegal rental property? And everyone will talk to them. I'm just trying to get a sense of how we would track this down.
Sure, I got an idea. If it's not a homesteaded property and it's like a multi-unit property, then it's probably illegally rented, would be my guess. I mean, if you live in the place, you homestead it. And so you could just start there and just reference that, and then they're receiving mail, it's probably illegal rental, and then have a verification process. I think it would require like the city council to make a ordinance that people are required to verify that they live there or don't live there or whatever. Sorry, I'm not explaining that properly. Anyways, yeah.
Okay, but your general point is try to find properties that are unlicensed and license those.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
To answer the previous gentleman's question, a developer wouldn't actually be able to scrape websites that advertise, and you guys would be able to effectively find people that don't have rental licenses potentially based upon the addresses. Maybe cost you $250 to hire a developer to create the whole program. Very easy. Anyways, I did some numbers. He did correct me. I did miss the $200 supplemental charge, which was not something that was included in the price. But the problem is that he did express to me that they wanted more of the burden to go to the tier 1 and tier 2 because the goal is to get people out of tier 3. So the increases actually are weighted more to be on tier 1 and tier 2 on a percentage basis. So tier 1 is a 100% increase for the 1 to 3 units,
Mm-hmm.
172% increase for tier 2, and only a 63% increase for tier 3. Now mind you, it's a little confusing because I'm using only 2 units to calculate that. It could potentially be different for 1 and 3 because you're using a quantity system now versus a flat rate before. And then the same thing for the 4 plus, significantly more, like that one gentleman stated. But I just used 4 units for my comparison purposes. It's 113% increase for the tier 1, 119% increase for tier 2, and 100% increase for tier 3. So once again, I understand his point that you would hopefully have more tier 1 and tier 2 folks, but the majority of the inspection, he was even quoted to me that one inspection every 8 years for tier 1 property is what the goal is for the city. And so it doesn't make logical sense to me that you would weight a majority of the increases back to the tier 1 and tier 2 folks. It would make sense you'd have the increase on the tier 3 folks. If you're short money, you're just basically incentivizing those folks that they don't, what's the difference? Why not just, I'm not going to pay very much more in rates because it's not much of a difference. I just double my rates and I keep a horrible property. So logically, this doesn't still make sense to me. It would make sense to actually have a significant increase on the tier 3 folks, make it a financial burden, make them sell it, make somebody else like myself, who I bought a couple rent-a-fit properties and fixed them up, and my tenants love me now.
Great, thank you. Ryan or Rob?
Ryan. Oh, this thing moves. So I'm Ryan Bovers, 655 Jefferson Street Northeast. I'm just here I'm not decided about whether I like the fee increase or not, but I'm here just to point out that everybody we've heard from has either been city employees or landlords, and nothing from renters. As much as we all might want to feel like we're in this together, landlords are not going to like this because they're paying more. Nobody likes to pay more. These fees would be going towards providing services and inspections. Ideally, I understand that there's an issue with anything everybody's already said. But the idea is that this would be going towards providing safety services towards renters. And we have not heard anything from renters. So I would like to suggest that to the council that we seek comment from renters, because I got this in my application for a rental license. I mean, my tenants don't get that, and I mean, we're facing a rental crisis where costs are going up. It disproportionately affects people, minority communities, and we're not asking for comment from them, and that's ultimately what I want to say.
Thank you for being here. Are you Rob?
I'm on the 3rd page.
The 4th page. Are you Evan? Come on up.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Evan Uribe. I live over at 1508 East 26th Street. I want to echo some of the concerns. I've got 20 units throughout the metro Minneapolis area. I want to echo some of the concerns of not seeing where my money for the rental licenses are going. I just purchased a 4-plex over Midtown Phillips, the tier 2 license. All my other buildings are tier 1. I talked to the rental licensing division, asked them, is there a way to get us bumped up to tier 1 because we have a great track record with the city, and we're paying for them to come on out, and they won't come out to go ahead and re-inspect the building. I just sunk $50,000 into rehabbing it, making a great property. We're keeping rents affordable. We're not jacking them all the way up to market rate. We're trying to do our part to keep housing affordable and to help with this crisis that we're having in terms of rental affordability, but they won't come out and re-inspect and get us up to that tier 1, even though we deserve it. That just seems a little bit counterintuitive to me when we're doing all we can to be a positive force for change in this city, and I'm not quite sure where our money is going. That's all.
Thank you for being here today. So the remaining names on the list are Bernadette, who I thought I saw in the room, and Rob Melch? You signed again. Okay, I'm sorry. And I didn't get your name right that time either, apparently. Bernadette, sorry about that. Feel free to come on up. Is there anyone else, before Bernadette speaks, is there anyone else who hasn't had an opportunity to speak who'd like to say something? Anyone? If you do, you have 2 minutes to think about that. Bernadette, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bernadette Hornig. I represent the Hornig Companies. I've been in business 60 years in Minneapolis and have over 2,000 rental units. I have mixed feelings about this increase. I do recognize the fact that the city needs to increase revenues and that the costs are going up the way our costs are going up in the business, and that's why our rents have to go up sometimes and your fees have to go up. I understand that and I accept that. I am concerned about the process, and I do think that the revised proposal is on the right track, but I feel like there was unnecessary haste, which may have left people out of the conversation inadvertently. I was very vocal in my opinions, but that's just how I am, and I think that there needs to be more study and review done in order to make sure that we get this right, especially if we're going to use this as a model to increase fees every 2 years. If we start with flawed assumptions going forward, we could lock ourselves into something that just doesn't make sense and have more problems down the road. For example, I think that we need to look at the tiering system and make changes to that. As the gentleman before me just said, he bought a property in Tier 2. I bought a property in Tier 3 from an owner that the city didn't want in business anymore, and we put $400,000 into it. But under the current process, we have to stay in Tier 3 for another year, and under this, our rental license fee would go from $2,000 to $10,000 a year, which, you know, I mean, people are talking about hundreds, and I'm sympathetic to that, but $10,000 on the backs of NOAA, moderate income renters in the city is a significant change. And I think it warrants all of our attention. I think the devil is in the details, and that we should really spend time thinking about the fee structure, what the city's goals and cost recovery are. I understand that I think the property taxpayers of Minneapolis should pay a portion. It's, as a neighbor, if you're in a single family home, it's in your interest to have the rental property next door licensed and inspected. I think there is a common good. I think some property taxes should cover the fees, and I think fees should cover a portion. So please take more time.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else here who'd like to speak? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Schuckman, do you want to try to answer some of these questions, or you do not? Otherwise, or Ms. Keller, otherwise I'm going to summarize what I heard and make it. No, go ahead. No, you should answer some of these questions.
Thank you, Chair Goodman, committee. And if there are questions that I don't cover that I've missed including, please do let me know. I'd be happy to get any answers that I can. I think kind of as a general statement in terms of how we got where we are today, I think it's important for us to recognize that prior to 2016, we did not have tiered rental licensing. And so no matter what condition your building was in or how many city services you used, the price that you paid was determined solely on how large your building was. When the fee study was done at that point, or the fees were put in place there, we were looking at a historic or a theoretical workload and theoretical pricing. Now we have 4 years of experience that are saying, what should we be at? What does workload really look like to within the different tiers and within the 2 different bodies of work for what our housing inspectors are doing, which is the 1 to 3 units, and our fire inspectors, which is the 4+ units.
Could you maybe just explain for everybody how many inspectors are there?
So there are roughly 45 inspectors who work in housing specifically. The housing inspections was 1 to 3 unit buildings, and which is about 2/3 of our unit or building portfolio. And then there are about 25 inspectors who work in our 4+ unit buildings. And these inspectors do rental licensing. They also do complaints and they do nuisance. They also do tenant interaction. I think there's also an important thing to think through is how we got to the fee itself. And there are a couple of different components to the fee. And I recognize that with the amended proposal, it can be a little bit challenging to keep everything straight. There is a building specific fee, and that is the fee that it costs just to go to the building, regardless of of whether you are 4 units or whether you're 400 units. So this is the time that is inspector time in terms of scheduling and drive time, but it's also our analyst time. It's our admin time. It's the time that is kind of the back of the house time as well that our landlords won't see. And then there's the per unit fee, which is the amount of time that it takes to actually inspect that unit. We have done calculations on the back end so that the percentage of units that are inspected is backed into that rate as well. So we're not, so we're making sure we have equal cost recovery between our larger buildings and our small buildings. Are there
Okay.
other questions that you were hoping to hear answers to?
I'll ask members of the committee, are there other questions? Council Member Gordon.
I guess I have a little question on the timing, although I think I know the answer. But I
Mhm.
think it's been raised a couple times. The full study of their fees and cost recovery isn't completed.
Mhm.
And are we rushing it now? Can we take more time?
Mhm.
I think there's a reason, just based on the budget approval cycle of the city of Minneapolis, why we need some of this information and stuff set up now. And maybe you can clarify why we're considering this now,
Sure.
in July, why we can't wait till September or December.
Through the chair, Council Member Gordon, I'm going to defer to finance on the overall timing. I will say that the timing of getting notification, the beyond the legal notification, but our courtesy notification out to landlords wasn't ideal. We had unexpected complications getting the letter out, which sent to that delay, and we hand printed and stuffed 25,000 of them in 2 days in order to provide as much opportunity as we could for people to be able to be here today.
And I didn't mean to imply that we couldn't delay, but I think there would be ramifications if we delayed decisions in terms of revenue for next year.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, thank you for the question. It is a good point that if there were a delay to the vote, so back to Mr. Ruff's opening presentation, as these fees are one of the sources of revenue for the general fund, it has a direct impact on what the mayor can or can't recommend in terms of expenditures in his budget. So his budget is set to be released on August 15th. So we would need to know before then what the available revenues would be for 2019.
Are there other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. I just want to tell you all what I heard, because a public hearing is to get information and to try to adjust according to what you've heard. So everyone might have a different opinion, but this is what I heard. That 4D properties in particular have a lot of inspections as a result of all of the public financing. And so why would we come in and inspect properties that are already part of the public system? I also heard that that's the same thing, and I know from the Section 8 work, it's the same thing times 10 for public housing units. So they already get an inspection. Do we need to have another inspection and rental licensing? I heard that there was very little notice. I'm aware of this, and I'm not thrilled about it either. So I do hear you when folks say that there wasn't enough notice to let your tenants potentially know, let renters know, and that is always a disservice to the public when there isn't a lot of notice. Nick, I'm not going to debate you. I'll also note that I heard that it's frustrating when someone buys a property that's in a lower tier, that it takes a long time to, after they spend a lot of money and do a lot of work to get to a higher tier, that it's still a problem that they're in a lower tier. Although I also hear that we're not charging the tier 3 the same percentage, or not the same increase in a tier 3 as we would in tier 1 and tier 2. And I understand why staff view it that way, but I can see how people who keep up their properties better potentially think that that is punitive. I also heard someone say, and I think it's a potential solution to discuss in the future, that maybe we should charge by the visit. I have a concern that we're charging for rental licenses and we don't even do the inspection. And so I wonder if that's not something we should be thinking about. I heard someone say that there are a number of unlicensed properties in the city and we should try to figure out a better way to deal with those. So these are some of the things I've heard that resonated with me, and I'm not sure we have the ability to solve all of those problems in the committee today, but they seem to be very salient comments that resonated with me, and I'm sure they did with other people too, but I'll take the burden of being here a long time and not being as knowledgeable about how rental licensing works, given what I heard. So I do think that public hearings are for us to be able to think through what we've heard from staff and what we've heard from the public and figure out what kind of solution we can propose. And I'm open to what members of the committee would like to do. And so I'll see if there's anyone else who has anything to say. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everybody who came and testified. I'll echo that I heard some good ideas. I did want to comment, somebody pointed out that we haven't heard a renter's perspective, and I actually have heard renters' perspectives in other venues and in general on the topic of inspections, which is in general that we've heard a demand that they want more of it. We've seen a lot of properties that are being poorly maintained. There's a real public health reason. There are real critical reasons that we need to invest in inspections and that we need to have inspections really focused on making sure that everybody who pays rent in the city is getting safe, reasonable quality housing in exchange for it. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about tenant protections, the question that's come back to us has been, how are you going to enforce that? Who's going to inspect it? What's going to happen? So I think it's important that that voice be in the room, in the context of this conversation. And then I'll just add that, we went through a property assessment process where we heard about property taxes going up and about how that's going to get passed on to renters and that's going to drive up costs. And now we're hearing about fees. And if we don't do it in the fees, we have to do it in the property taxes. And so somehow this is going to get paid for. And I think, from my perspective, I'm not sure that this is a perfect proposal, but I think that what it does is it balances fees and property taxes a little bit more fairly than what's been done. I think to your point, I think there is a public interest, and it makes sense for there to be some subsidy. I don't think that it's a signal of dysfunction that the general fund is paying for part of the inspections, because there is a universal benefit to all of us that inspections be done and that this work happen. But I do think that the balance is a little bit off, and I think we're correcting for that. So in general, I'd support moving this forward. I know we've heard some frustration in this room, but I appreciate the work that's gone into it, and I do think we got some good ideas about how to fix some of the other issues that were raised here as we move forward with this committee.
Further comments? No one? Councilmember Gordon?
I appreciated everybody coming in. Appreciated the comments too. I understand how the rental license can feel like a burden. I also understand how those costs a lot of times get passed on to tenants. I think sometimes some landlords will absorb some of the costs of increases. We heard from somebody who pays, I think was paying some utility bill. So I guess it depends on what the going rate is and how much you can get for rent and how much you want to be able to make get as profit, so you can be up and above. I did want to comment a little bit on the condo ownership idea. I think that one thing I appreciated about this was it did streamline some of those things. I'll also hear a lot in my ward about how if it's an owner-occupied duplex or triplex, it's managed much better and it's going really well. And so you could almost make the same case, well, why would the owner-occupant then have to pay any rental licensing fee? And also, I think it's clear that some condo associations can be much more involved and active than others. And so I think if we start slicing things up like that, it'll be really hard to follow and hard to track. So I appreciated actually that this came in a little bit more streamlined. It was interesting that there was kind of a surcharge on the tiers as well as a difference in per unit costs as well as the building costs. So it also looks pretty complicated. I think it was even hard for our accountant to follow and understand, at least as it was laid out in this very detailed sheet as well. Made that complicated and difficult. I think it makes some sense to maybe not, I just want to be clear, tier 3 is paying more than the other tiers, even though their increase isn't as much a big percentage as it might be for the second, but there's still going to be incentives for getting down to tier 2 and to tier 1, especially once you get over this first year of the increase. So I see you shaking your head. Well, you didn't convince me that there's going to be an incentive. I'm in tier 2. I want to get to tier 3 so I can pay more next year. I don't think that's how the tier 2 operator is going to be thinking at all. They're going to want to go down to tier 1. So next year it's even less, hopefully. So that's out there, and it also costs us more. I think it is too bad that we aren't doing this. Maybe it didn't have our study done fully. I think there's other fees in other areas, restaurants and food and lodging, maybe that we need bigger adjustments as well. I guess we'll see how it goes. I'm willing to support this to try it next year. I do think one of the key services that we try to provide is to be available for the renters and the tenants and also the others in the neighborhood. So it's not just a service to landlords that we're trying to provide, but it's a service to everybody by doing this and managing these rental licenses. And absolutely, I guess now we need to also be getting those people who are renting illegally, because so we need other resources, not just to look at the rental licenses that we now have and deal with it and help the tenants there or whatever, but also to look at what else is going on in our city. I suppose we would still have time to get it into the budget if we waited one cycle or something like that, but I'm prepared to support Councilmember Fletcher's near motion that I think I heard him make to move this forward with recommendation.
Councilmember Ellison.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out and giving testimony, and I think that there's some real merit to a lot of the ideas, especially the per visit, idea that was thrown out there. I think that that's something that we should be looking into. I'm also ready to support these increases, though, and I just wanted to stress that when we look back on one of those initial slides and you see that between the areas that were trying to put some increases, we're already subsidizing at 15.5 million, right? Like that's a steep subsidy that's passed on to the whole city, and I think that there is room for us to make up some ground there. I also want to stress that as we enter into becoming a majority renter city, right, whether folks like that or not, and I think about wards like mine where there are a lot of vulnerable renters, and that might not be the renters that you represent here, but it's certainly the renters that I represent. We need to find ways to make sure that we're protecting vulnerable renters as well, and making sure that we're doing more inspections as a way to do that. And I think that there's something that really falls flat on the argument that everything that we would do to potentially protect renters is actually going to hurt them financially. I think that is a convenient argument for some people who wouldn't want to have to sort of pay into a system their more fair share, and not a legitimate argument. And so, yeah, as a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody else has comments, but I will make a motion to approve, move forward on this item.
Okay, on the motion by Councilmember Ellison, are there further comments or questions? I think what I want to say is I think fees have to go up. And so it's either this proposal or it's going to be something along the lines of 4% per year for the 5 years we didn't increase fees. And so I'm not sure I'm prepared to just suggest a whole new scheme after all the work that's been done. I do think that we have to do something. I was one of the people who fought fee increases for a number of years. And I'm not sorry I did that, but I do think at some point the economy is doing better and we need to be able to adjust. Though I will say, I think other people on the committee would agree with me if asked that we need to be looking at 4D properties and other properties like MPHA properties and other affordable housing units that are already getting inspected. We don't need to be the inspector of all. We don't need to be the duplicate inspector. And I really think that's a big issue that we need to address, as well as, I'm interested myself in this issue of someone buying a tier 3 or tier 2 property, improving it, and then having to wait an entire year to have their tiers changed. These are things we need to be working on right now. Not let's wait till next year to have an argument over another fee increase, but these are part of a larger affordable housing strategy that I think we need to deal with right away. And I would ask our regulatory services people to give some thought to that, so we can figure out how we do it. Some of the other ideas that we heard today, I also think have some merit, including paying, ensuring we're going to inspect everybody, or paying when we inspect to ensure we only are charging for what we actually do. I think we need to think a little bit more about that too. So I will support the recommendation, as much as I hate raising fees, because I don't think I have a better way or a fairer way of doing it. And I think it has to be done at this point. Are there further comments or questions? Seeing none, on Councilmember Ellison's motion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. Thank you all for being here today. We are going to move on to item number 5, which is a PACE financing for Minnehaha United Methodist Church. We'll give a moment for everyone to clear the room. Ms. Shaw, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. You have before you two requests to pass resolutions adopting the assessment, levying the assessment, and adopting the assessment rule for property assessed clean energy or PACE energy financing in the city of Minneapolis. The first project is for a photovoltaic solar installation on Minnehaha United Methodist Church.
Ms. Shaw, could you speak up and/or speak into the microphone?
Sure.
I have a
I'm
hard
sorry.
time hearing, so I bet other people do too.
Okay. The first project I have is for a photovoltaic solar installation on Minnehaha United Methodist Church, located at 3701 East 50th Street. The total project cost is $136,896. The requested loan amount is $127,371 at a 5% interest rate and will pay back over a term of 10 years. As a result of this project, Minnehaha United Methodist Church will save approximately $7,000 in annual energy costs. And I do have individuals here from the Minnehaha United Methodist Church to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, are there any questions for staff on the recommendation with regard to the PACE Energy Program at Minnehaha United Methodist Church? We're going to take them one at a time. Okay, great. Does not look like there are any questions since we're fairly familiar with PACE. So we'll open the public hearing on item number 5, which is the passage of the resolution adopting the assessment, levying the assessment for a PACE project for photovoltaic at Minnehaha United Methodist Church. And I know these ladies have been waiting a long time to speak. So thank you for being here.
My name is Joan Ellison, a member of the congregation and a member of our solar team. We are very encouraged with this project. We're very excited. It supports our mission, and we hope you will approve.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Did either of you ladies like to speak as well? Thank you both very much, for all three of you, for being here and sitting through the earlier public hearing. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Fletcher.
I'm happy to move approval of this item.
Approval has been moved. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved, and we'll move on to our second PACE project for today.
Okay, the second project is for a solar array, roof reinforcements, and LED lighting at Vertiva Investments commercial property located at 3501 23rd Avenue South. The total project is $75,687.50. Of that, $56,000 will be financed at a 4.5% interest rate and will be paid back through an assessment placed on the property over the term of 9 years. As a result of this project, 88% of the building's electricity usage will come from renewable energy, with CO2 emissions reduction of 23,380 pounds per year. And I might have somebody here from Vertiva Investments.
Is anyone here from Vertiva Investments?
Maybe not. I can answer any questions that
Okay.
you have.
Are there any
Project.
questions for Ms. Shaw on item number 6? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing on item number 6 and see if there's anyone here to speak to this issue. Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Fletcher.
Let's get more renewable energy. I move approval.
Approval of item number 6 has been moved. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll move on then to our last remaining item, which is item number 21. Mr. Carroll, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Kevin Carroll from the Business Development Division of CPED. I'm here today because at some prior meetings of this committee, you indicated an interest in possibly changing some of the brownfield grant policies. Just a word or two about timing. The reason I'm here today is because if you do make changes, they will presumably go into effect with regard to the next brownfield grant round, which will have a November 1 application deadline. The city's pre-application deadline for that will likely be in early September. We traditionally try to give developers and others at least 30 days advance notice of our pre-application deadlines, which in this case for this coming round will be early August. So if there are to be policy changes, it would be handy to have those determined maybe by the end of this month or early next month.
We can do it today.
Yeah.
So no need for you to worry about our willingness to make this policy change. We will comply with your timeline, I guarantee it.
All right. I'm not worried. So here's the issue. For many years, the city's policy with regard to brownfield grant funding has been kind of an open tent theory. The state of Minnesota adopted its first brownfield grant program, I think, in 1995 or 1998. The Met Council followed a couple years later. Hennepin County followed a couple years later. So for at least 15 years, the city's position with regard to brownfield grant funding is if you own a property in Minneapolis that is contaminated in some way and you wish to redevelop it and you wish to get grant funding from one of these grantors to help you do that, the city will provide the means. The city is involved in the process because all of these grantors, with one exception, require that the city support the project. A city council resolution of support is needed for the application to be viable. And again, in most cases, the grant funding, if awarded, is not awarded to the developer. It's awarded to the city on behalf of the developer. And then the city is involved in basically administering the grant. The money passes from the grantor to the city and then to the developer. So we've got a critical role in this. We are essentially the gatekeepers. We decide which projects can pursue grant funding and which can't. So my understanding is that because of the heightened interest in affordable housing, you wanted us to look at the question of whether the city should support grant applications to these grantors for residential projects that are 100% market rate projects. In the past, we've done that. We haven't made any distinctions. We've supported affordable housing projects, market rate projects, commercial projects, industrial, open park space. We've done all those. We've supported all of those. If you are to make an exception and not support grant applications for market rate projects, there's a means to do that. And as I've identified in the staff report, there is an exception that currently exists in the city's housing policy for projects that involve pollution remediation. And I wasn't involved personally in the creation of that exception. The most recent adoption, I think, has been in December of last year when the amended and restated unified housing policy was adopted. And that exception or provision was included in that. So if you want to change the policies, it seems like the logical way to do it would be to further amend that policy and remove that pollution remediation exception. If you do that, then all projects that wanted to seek brownfield grant funding, all housing projects, would be required to have at least 20% of the units affordable at 60% AMI in order to be eligible for your support. And our understanding is that you're kind of leaning in that direction. We did try to put some information in the staff report regarding the potential consequences of this so that you're fully informed. It is a bit of a sea change with regard to how things have been done in the past. And there will be consequences, especially with regard to the number of grants awarded to city projects and the amount of grant funding provided to city projects. But my understanding is that you see this as a way of encouraging market rate projects to include affordable housing in cases where they otherwise would not. At least that's my understanding of the philosophy behind it. And I think the staff report gives you a suggestion regarding how you can accomplish that if you wish to do so.
Are there any questions for Mr. Carroll? I don't see any.
I don't hear any.
Thank you for your report.
Yes.
Okay. Members of the committee, what is your pleasure? Commissioner Gordon, Councilmember Gordon.
So I'm very supportive of this idea. My understanding was that there might be an option where we could not put that requirement in place for all parts of the city. So whether we take one of our already designated things like impacted neighborhoods and we don't put that requirement in there or not is something I think that we should talk about here. I'm actually having trouble opening my limbs to look at the staff report online. So
I can
I'm not sure if that recommendation is actually in there.
It is not. Mr.
Isn't.
To be fair, Mr. Frank sent me an email after I spoke with you this morning suggesting that they weren't sure if they wanted to do that. And I said, well, the committee will decide. Mr. Frank.
Okay.
Madam Chair, committee members, David Frank from CPIT. This came up a little bit more recently than Kevin's staff report. We did spend some time in the past week trying to come up with a geography to recommend to you should you be interested in creating for this pilot, for this fall brownfield grant round that Kevin's been discussing, creating a difference as to geography. So if it's a market rate project here, then
the affordable housing policy would apply. And if it was in a more market challenged area, for instance, it might not. We weren't able in that amount of time to come up with a clear and compelling difference. Kevin's done some quick work to show where the past 3 or 4 years worth of brownfield applications have fallen. And we believe that it won't, let me say it like this, it won't make a difference for this coming round. We don't believe that we're likely to get applications that we'd be standing here recommending to you that the policy should not apply. So we think the right thing is, as Kevin's recommended here, that you instruct us, we feel instructed, you instruct us to include the affordability requirement for what would otherwise be market rate projects in this coming fall brownfield grant round, and we'll do it, and then we will evaluate. And along the way, we can figure out, should we have a geographic distinction going forward? If that's
Okay, I appreciate that. I think we can talk about it more if we want. That idea resonated with me, but it won't make a difference, and I'm assuming it won't make a difference because we're not expecting any applications in certain areas, or why won't it make a difference?
Madam Chair, committee members, Councilmember Gordon, I don't mean we're not expecting any applications. We hope we get applications from all over the city. What I mean is our analysis reveals that the projects which have applied are in, I'll say, strong market parts of town. So in any event, we would not be recommending to you that the locations of those projects would be excluded from where we'd require affordability in this round. So there's no geography, opportunity zones or promise zone or some other likely geography that we'd recommend to you where we would have ruled out any projects from this requirement.
Okay.
But Mr. Frank, we could just simply add the language that says projects located within the promise zone are exempted from this.
Madam Chair,
Even
yes.
if that made no difference.
Yeah, Madam Chair, yes, of course we could.
It is very curious that there are no market rate projects anywhere other than the hottest parts of town, and those are the ones that are asking for subsidy. There must not be any pollution remediation needed anywhere else in the city, right?
Madam Chair, we take your point.
Yeah, that's like a totally insulting. I mean, maybe if we put in promise zone locations, there might be a little bit more motivation to build in some of those areas too. So, I'm sorry, Councilmember Gordon, I
Well,
cut you off.
it's always, you didn't really, we're having a good discussion. I appreciate that. I just wanted to add that maybe we can even refine this between our meeting and the council meeting to see what we could look at some of the, I mean, we certainly with tax credits, I mean, there's other maps that we have, there's green zones that we have, there's the promise zone. So I'd be comfortable moving it forward and then having some time to think about it and maybe come up with some other strategies too.
I like that idea quite a bit, actually. I will just say I want to do this. Mr. Carroll knows this. I understand the staff are not thrilled about it, and you view it as turning back money. I view it a little bit differently. I view it as subsidizing polluters. I view this as property owners who are basically purchasing property for very high rates, knowing they can turn around and get the government to pay for their pollution remediation. So it essentially rewards property owners of polluted sites by saying you can still charge top dollar, don't deduct for the pollution remediation in your price because the government will pay. And I'm cool if the government pays for it because I do think pollution remediation is something that's a market failure thing, but then it might come with some strings attached. It makes me sick that so many projects in my ward that were high-end market rate projects got $500,000 or $1 million in public subsidy and didn't put in one affordable unit. So the progressive in me still says when public money is included, we have the opportunity as elected officials to pursue some of the goals that we think are important. And if it means turning back money, it doesn't mean turning back money. It means letting other communities within the state of Minnesota access those funds to do projects. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we are a regional economy. If a project goes to St. Paul or somewhere else, that's not a terrible thing. And if this completely backfires and no one ever wants to build anything in the city of Minneapolis again unless they get on our brownfields list, well, some of my constituents would probably think that was good. So I don't think it's bad to continue to try new and different things. I probably would not have brought this up on my own, but I feel a big headwind. This committee is blowing harder than me to do this. And so I don't think that this is something that we should criticize on the staff level, but think about as another way that we can encourage the building of affordable housing in the city without our staff having to beg for more money in the budget process and or come up with more new and unique ideas. No one else? Oh, thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think it's very, very important to send a signal that looking at, and this may be, an indication that the market's changed over time and the policy may have been appropriate previously, but I think in general, I want to set the expectation that the need that we've identified in our city is affordable housing, and the thing that we're looking for help with, if we're going to get involved in subsidy, if we're going to get involved in, get public money involved in finance, is to help contribute to that affordability. Because in general, I think we feel like market rate housing is getting built just fine. Thank you very much. And I'm wondering if the right way to approach this, rather than a geographic restriction, is actually to say, to make the exception for properties where the cost of brownfield cleanup exceeds the value of the land once cleaned. Essentially, that would give us properties where they wouldn't get sold and developed otherwise, right? So the idea being, if there's a $3 million property and it's going to cost $1 million to clean up, we would rather they negotiate down to $2 million to incorporate in the cost of the cleanup and handle that as a private transaction if there's going to be, if it's just going to be market rate housing. But if it's $1 million property and it requires $1.5 million to clean up, that's going to sit there as a blight in our community for a long, long time. So maybe that's actually the exception that we need to make. And I think that's kind of where the math falls apart in some of the promise zone areas. So I would propose that as an alternative to sort of apply a logic that makes sure that we're applying for money in places where it meets the but-for test, right? Where development actually wouldn't happen unless we get the money in for the cleanup.
Councilmember Ellison.
Yeah, I like that idea. I would want maybe to Cam's suggestion between now and the next council meeting to be able to vet that idea. Okay, cool, great.
Thank you for bringing that up. What we were just saying was, combine what Councilmember Gordon said with what Councilmember Fletcher said, and let's see if we can get a little bit closer together on what potential exceptions there would be. I think that makes the most sense, but I just want to be clear, we're going to do this.
We hear you.
So please work with us to try to figure out what the best way to do this is that isn't a hammer to stop development in the city, but is more in line with not rewarding people who own polluted property and allowing them to rely on government
It's like a golf club.
to be responsible for. Well, I don't want to be responsible for the cleanup and not inflict my point of view with regard to the importance of affordable housing on projects. So I think what we'll do is we'll move this forward without recommendation with the goal that council members Fletcher and Gordon will work with Mr. Carroll between now and a week from Friday. So we'll keep it in this cycle and go from there. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Frank and Mr.
Yes,
Carroll?
you bet.
Okay. I'll move this item forward without recommendation. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. Seeing no further business before us, correct? I'm looking at the clerk. We are adjourned.
I'm gonna like repress the